The last lesson introduced us to the concept of anti-Semitism, which refers to hatred towards or discrimination against Jews. We have also learnt about Hitler's racial ideology that placed the German Aryans at the top of all races. And Hitler combined his racial ideology together with an anti-Semitic propaganda to persecute the Jews during his rule. Now we have learnt that the First World War ended in Germany's crushing and humiliating defeat before the Allied powers. Now many Germans were of the opinion that it was for the Jews that Germany was defeated. So the point that we need to keep in our minds is that rumor and anti-democratic sentiments, which were further fueled by centuries of anti-Semitism, actually made the Germans believe that the Jews were responsible for Germany's defeat in the First World War, and the politicians were responsible for the ensuing economic crisis. And in this way we can understand how the Jews for one more time were now being persecuted and held responsible for the severe situation that Germany was enmeshed in following the First World War. Following this, a myth now became popular among the German masses, and this myth was one of stab in the back. This illustration here shows us what this myth was all about. Here we see a German soldier fighting on the trenches for saving and protecting his country from foreign invasions during the First World War. But it is a Jew here who is actually stabbing the German soldier in the back. That is to say, the Jews were actually hindering Germany from getting success and victory in the First World War. So this is the reason, that is to say, anti-Semitic propaganda was the reason why this myth of stab in the back became popular against the Jews in Nazi Germany. The Jews were also blamed of spying for the Allies. We have learnt that how the Jews were held with suspicion by the Europeans, and the Germans were all filled with hatred and anger against the Jews, which is why they considered that the Jews were actually working as spies for the Allied forces. This further reinforces the idea that the Jews were seen as backstabbers by the Germans. And the Nazis were very careful and clever enough to popularize this myth. That is to say, they popularized that all Jews were actually backstabbers, and in this way they reclaimed their prominence. In this way they established themselves and they forwarded the anti-Semitic propaganda. Now here we will be talking about what was happening to not just the Jews but all the undesirables when the Nazi rule started in Germany. So what we will be trying to trace is the trajectory from no right to live among us to no right to live. Now Nazi rule in Germany has been divided into several phases. Firstly, we begin with the period of exclusion that took place from 1933 to 1939. Now this was a time when the Jews were excluded from the society, so to speak. The Nuremberg laws were passed in 1935, and this stated a very important point about citizenship. What did it mention? It mentioned that only those people who had the pure German blood actually qualified as German citizens. All non-Aryans who did not have this pure German blood flowing in their body did not qualify as German citizens. Now here you can see a bench in the park, and here is something engraved in German. It roughly translates to only for Aryans in English. So this is how segregation was being performed in the society at this point of time. Benches in the parks were also reserved only for the Aryans. This was how the Aryans were being separated from the rest of the population in Germany during this period of exclusion. Before proceeding with this lesson, let me ask you a question. When were the Nuremberg laws passed in Germany? Were those passed in 1930, 1935, 1938 or 1941? Well, the correct answer is 1935. The Nuremberg laws that stated that only those citizens who had the pure German blood in them qualified as German citizens was passed in 1935. Now here we come to a few other ideas that were prevalent during this period of exclusion. All kinds of marital and non-marital relationships between the Germans and the Jews were completely forbidden. That is to say, no German could now marry a Jew. Why was this done? This was done to maintain the racial superiority, to maintain the racial dominance of the German Aryans. Anti-Semitic sentiments were reaching the peak around this time. All kinds of Jewish businesses were boycotted, and the Jews were also thrown out of government services. So the Jews literally had no way of earning a living. Here you can see how placards were being hung on the streets, and these placards were actually asking the Germans to rise in action against the Jews. These placards used to ask the Germans to boycott all Jewish businesses, to not buy anything from the Jews, to get rid of all kinds of Jewish goods. So this was how the Jews were being excluded in the German society during this period. At this time, the Jews had already begun losing everything they had. This is because Jewish property that included the synagogues, which were their religious places, were being looted, vandalized and confiscated by the Nazi party officials. In a pogrom that took place in November 1938 and later came to be known as the Night of the Broken Glass, a Jewish synagogue was burned to pieces. Jews were losing everything. Through mass shootings, through mass killings, through violent riots and pogroms, many Jews were being killed, and all their property was being confiscated by the Nazi officials. The period of exclusion was followed by another more severe period of segregation, and this period then came to be known as ghettoization. This was happening in Germany from 1940 to 1944. Now during this period of ghettoization, the Jews were segregated from the rest of the community, and so the Jews were compelled to wear a yellow Star of David on their chest as the marker of their religious identity. In fact, this yellow Star of David, as you can see here, was also marked on the passports of the Jewish people. Now, why do you think it was done? This was done to mark the Jews so that it became easier for the Nazi officials to hound these innocent people. The Jews were no longer allowed to live in their houses from this point of time. They were made to live in the Jewish houses, or worse, in the ghettos. Now in the ghettos, the Jews were worked to death. And here, when they were kept in the ghettos like Lodz and Warsaw in Poland, the Jews had to first surrender all their property. So they lost everything before they entered the ghettos. But Hitler realized that only segregation of the Jews in the German society wasn't sufficient. because Hitler's anti-Semitism posited that there was no solution to the Jewish problem apart from the Jews' complete elimination. And this then came to be known as the Holocaust. Now, what this Holocaust is a matter of discussion that we will be taking up separately in our subsequent lesson. But for now, we should know that the Jews' complete elimination that was happening in the Nazi rule was known as the Holocaust. And this was followed by the final period of annihilation that started 1941 onwards in Nazi Germany. So this Hitler thought was the final solution to the Jewish problem. The Jews who were kept in the Jewish houses in the ghettos were taken by train to the death factories. And what happened in the death factories? It is in these death factories that the Jews were charred to death. In these death factories, the Jews were literally burnt to death. And all this was done with scientific precision. These Jews lost their lives in a matter of a few minutes. Poisonous gases like carbon monoxide were released in the death factories, and the Jews simply succumbed to this. So here we can locate in this map of Germany during this period the various concentration camps and death camps. Now we know that the concentration camps were the places where all the undesirables from the German society were deported. And in these concentration camps, the quote-unquote criminals were tortured, they were beaten, they were even starved to death. And the Jews were taken from the concentration camps, from the ghettos, from the Jewish houses to the death camps, which were the final extermination camps. 6 of these camps were located in German-occupied Poland. And these camps were the Chelmno, the Treblinka, the Sobibor, the Majdanek, the Belzec, and the Auschwitz. Here in these death camps, the Jews met the worst possible that any human's fate can ever hold for them. The Jews were charred to death. They did not have any option. Firstly, they were starved. They were overworked. And then poisonous gases like carbon monoxide were released from the gas chambers. And by inhaling those poisonous gases, death came to the Jews in just a matter of minutes. This is what their lives were reduced to in Nazi Germany. And this constitutes one of the most horrendous phases in human history. So this now brings us to an end of our discussion on the steps to death. Here we learned how the Jews were firstly segregated in the society. They were excluded. Then they were sent to live in the ghettos. They lost all their property. Everything they had was vandalized and looted and confiscated. But this was not enough to Hitler. He believed that the Jews should be completely exterminated, which is why they were then sent to the death factories or the extermination camps. And in these extermination camps, the Jews were charred to death. Having learnt about this, our next lesson will introduce us to the concept of Holocaust. The Holocaust as a term must have been heard by many of you. But as students of history, we will find out in great detail what this Holocaust meant. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon. You can also register for free at DeltaStep.com or download the DeltaStep app to learn one-to-one with our amazing teachers or to get access to all our 5,000 plus amazing videos as per your school syllabus. Master each topic with our adaptive practice technology. Get million plus questions with step-by-step solutions and unlimited mock tests. Get all your doubts resolved instantly. Learn via games and win amazing prizes like PlayStations and iPads. So at DeltaStep, learning is not just fun and easy, it's rewarding too. So register for free now.